Hello, care to chat? Now that's not just an invitation, it's also our podcast from the Northern Ireland Social Care Council. I'm Wendy Austin and it's great that you're listening. Social care and social work are such enormously important parts of life here. They really came to the fore during the pandemic, and now with the crisis in the health service, they're back in the news again. So what are these jobs? Who are the people who work in them? What are the routes into social care and social work? How can staff progress and develop their careers? What reforms are necessary? And how do people in these fields take care of themselves as well as their clients? Well, that's what we're talking about this time. They take care of us. Let's take care of them. How's that being encouraged? Well, let's find out. I have the top award-winning team with me. Mita Keenan and Mairead Harkin are both Workforce Development Officers who contributed to the Resilience and Wellbeing Resource for Social Care Workers. Also with us today, Michael Dunlop, who's CEO of Power Choice. Michael's an expert in neuro-linguistic programming, and much more of that in a moment. And Leanne McCafferty of Inspiral Coaching, who's a master in neuro-linguistic programming too. And they've all contributed to this resource that we're talking about today. So let's find out a bit more about that just to kick off for us. Who came together to create this resource? How was it all developed? I think Mita and Mairead are the two kind of driving forces here. Which one of you would like to start for us? You're pointing at each other. That doesn't work on the radio.
I'll start. So I will.
And this is Mita.
Mairead and I were sitting at the back of our office. We were working on a resource that the department had asked us to update, which was the infection control. And this was literally the week before the lockdown. As we were working through that resource, we just started talking about what was going to happen with social care workers, the pressure that they were going to be under, and what could we do to try and help them during that process. Michael and Leanne had been contracted, I suppose, to do some work with social care workers and face-to-face training, but obviously that wasn't going to take place. So we thought, we wonder if we could repurpose that money and develop a resource, and Mairead will talk about the resource because she's the expert in building the resources. Just could we take what we were going to do in health and well-being and resilience for social care workers and turn it into an online resource? So I spoke to someone in NISC who then phoned Leanne, had a conversation with Leanne, and that really was how it all started from there.
So, I mean, that was very prescient of the two of you to realise that what was ahead, which was something that none of us had ever had to deal with before, was going to be putting so much pressure on the people that you work with and who came to be so enormously important in the weeks and months to follow.
Well, I suppose working for the Northern Ireland Social Care Council, and in the work that both Mairead and I do, and the contact that we had with social care workers over the years, and I had worked in social care for over 20 years before that as well. So you knew the pressure that people were you knew the daily pressure that they were under even before the pandemic hit. So you could just feel that there's something was going to happen with them, and we knew that we would have to do something to try and support them in some way. We've also had experience of using social care within our own families, so we know what the girls are like, and mostly girls, and I say girls because 90% of the workforce is women, so we know what they're like when they come in and the pressures that they're facing. So that's really where it all started from.
Mita's handed the baton to you on this one, Mairead. It's an interesting way that you have to go about these resources, because sometimes you develop something like that and it's intended for people to use on a laptop, but you want this to be accessible and available to social care workers who are maybe just going to be looking at it on their smartphone. So it needs to be pretty flexible, doesn't it?
We did. The content is probably in the language was quite interesting and challenging, and we needed to make it relevant for our social care workers. And I suppose the process we use is about chunking material down, making it accessible, making it practical, providing it in bite-sized formats, and it's a process we've been doing with a lot of resources. So we take the content and we have to sort of, like, part of the process I do is the design process and breaking it down and chunking it down and trying to figure out what's the best way to present it. And we like to make things as easy to follow and sort of in bite-sized chunks. Part of that is all about good design principles, about making it useful, desirable, credible, findable and usable. And we use a lot of multimedia images, and we think about who our learners are and what's the best format, what's the best language to make it accessible. And the resource we build is very adaptable, and it can be, it can be downloaded across any device. And the point, what we feel is really useful for the resource, is can be accessed at any time, any device, anywhere. And so that our social care workers can sort of pick it up at any time and learn in their own time and at their own pace. And that is probably some of the really positive feedback we've got back, that it was easy to follow. It provided very practical tips. It allowed people to sort of get a real understanding of how this content could really help them manage their well-being, manage resilience, give them some really nice, easy tips to use, broke down something that is quite difficult when you think of the language of neuro-linguistic programming, and made it something that was very, I suppose, easy to follow.
User-friendly.
Really user-friendly and practical. So yes, it was a good process, and we work really collaboratively. It was a collaborative process. Everything we do is collaborative in the Social Care Council, and because by doing that, we bring the right people together to make it meaningful and useful to the end user, which was our social care workers. So to give something back that would make a difference to their everyday lives and to their working practices and how they engage and interact and communicate with others. So it was a really positive experience, which we're very proud of.
Well, and rightly so, and it seems to have been a very positive experience for those who were using it as well. Let's just take a pause here for a minute and find out a bit more about this neuro-linguistic programming. Terrific title, if I might say. So Michael and Leanne are the masters at this. For those of us who find that a bit of a mouthful, Michael, can you explain the concept of the whole thing? Break it down for me.
Hi, Wendy. You're starting me with the easy question then. Neuro-linguistic programming. I'm a trainer in NLP. It's a terrible name. Let's be honest. It's like asking somebody from Armagh for directions. They'd generally tell you I wouldn't start from here if I was you. It developed in the 70s in California at the University of California at Santa Cruz. So it was, I suppose, the development of Silicon Valley, which is kind of how the name was created. Essentially, it looks at patterns of thinking and communication and behaviour. How mostly they're habitual. We develop them over a lifetime and we're not even aware that we're doing them, like me waving my hand right now, for example, as I'm talking. And it looks at how we can change them if we need to change them, and how we can observe them in other people so we can help to build relationships with other people. So essentially it's about giving yourself a little bit of choice in life. That's the idea with NLP. You'll not find university courses in leadership or coaching programs these days where you don't get an element of NLP in it, because at its best, at its heart, it's very, very practical. It has some simple tools and techniques and approaches to life and work that most people can pick up and use and get some results from, make a little bit of a difference. So we would do the programs, some of the leadership programs for the Chief Executives Forum, for example, with senior leaders in public service. And it would be about leadership skills, it would be about systems thinking, it would be about decision making, but it would also be about looking after yourself. It's a hard old station in public service, having to make difficult decisions that affect so many people. And that's where NLP can be very, very helpful in terms of the practical skills and approaches and tools and techniques that it has. So the senior leadership team in the Social Care Council had been on some of those programs, and that's where they first came across this. And the Chief Executive, Patricia Higgins, and Marion O'Rourke were asking, could we do some of this with the social care workforce, because they could see how it could apply. And that's kind of how we developed the relationship in the first place. As Mita and Maria have both said, we were originally going to do a programme across the social care workforce, and Leanne has real experience in social care. She has an authority I'm never going to have because she has walked the talk there. And I asked Leanne, would she come and help me to develop this? And we did it jointly. And then COVID hit. And I always remember Catherine McGuire from the Social Care Council describing it, where it was on your TV and it was happening in China. And it was terrible and it was awful, but it was the other side of the world. And then as the days and the weeks went by, it was sweeping through Europe and you knew it was coming. And what were you going to do? So, I mean, we're in awe of what the Social Care Council did and how they went about it, knowing this was coming and they were going to be going through it as well. But how could they prepare the social care workforce for this? And one of the things that they were very keen on doing was making sure that there were some resources in place that, knowing that social care was going to be on the front line, in a way that most other professions and sectors couldn't begin to appreciate, that those people who are there, they needed some tools and techniques, some ways of looking after themselves as they were looking after other people, as they were taking care of them. So we were asked if we could put this into an online resource. I remember getting the phone call from Mervyn, as Maria's just mentioned. And I remember saying, yeah, okay, how long have we got? And he said 2 weeks. Now, I said yes, but when I put the phone down, my first thought was, how am I going to do this? And then I realised, in a moment of clarity, I didn't actually have to, because I had the brilliance of Leanne. We brought Lynn McCone in as well, who's also a brilliant NLP master practitioner and an expert in human resources and in leadership. And also we had the brilliant team in the Social Care Council. And over the space of 2 weeks, we put together what we thought would work in terms of some simple, practical approaches that would be useful, that it wasn't just simply a description of what people were going through, and there's a lot of that about. It wasn't simply an academic theory. There's nothing wrong with academic theories, but it wasn't simply theory, that there were some practical things that we could do. Leanne, and who's at some point I will allow to talk honestly, Leanne.
She's champing at the bit.
I know. Leanne was brilliant at being, I suppose, the go-between between us, the translator between some of the simple approaches from NLP and having that experience in social care and in that social care workforce and knowing what was useful. And then Maria and Mita, absolutely amazing at turning what we came up with into something that was engaging, that was practical, that was useful. So it really was a team effort.
It certainly sounds like it. And it's a fascinating kind of idea, concept, bringing something which is normally used, as Michael said there, for kind of senior leaders, who are making big decisions, but actually translating it into something which is for people who, with the greatest of respect to senior leaders, at the time of COVID, were doing something which was even more important. And as he says, you were the translator here because you have the experience in social care, Leanne. But you're also a master practitioner in NLP.
Yeah. Those two skill sets sort of place me perfectly to be the conduit, I suppose, between us as a team in OR and the team in NISC. And for us, we knew that, NLP and some of the frameworks and the tools within it could make a massive difference for social care workers. Yes, you find them in leadership training and that, but NLP makes a real difference for anyone who chooses to study it or to explore it further. So we knew that there was things there that could make a real difference for people in that, situation. And people were going to be dealing not just with their own experiences and their own fears and anxieties and worries about it, but also supporting people through their fears and anxieties about it too. So as a team in OR, we knew that there was lots of things that we could share with people that would help make a difference for them and also for the people that they supported. And the work, because of my work in social care, I've worked in social care now for over 20 years in a variety of different roles. I started when I paid my way through university as a support assistant in residential and nursing homes and moved on to manage supported living accommodation for adults with learning disabilities and working in learning development. And in my previous role, my last role, in an organisation where we met last Wednesday through Triangle Housing Association as the participation and engagement manager. Having that insight and that understanding about social care and those different roles, both operationally and strategically, and having built relationships with Mida and Mairead and that before and done, lots of different things with them, that helped us to work effectively together, and it made it easier. It wasn't easy, 2 weeks to deliver all of that. It is a challenge, there's no getting away from it. But those relationships that we already had and working together, Mida, Mairead and David were fantastic. And we bounced ideas off each other and passed things over and had a look at them, didn't we? And thinking, okay, that's not quite accessible, that not work. So how do we make it easier for people to understand? And as Mairead says, people needed to access it quickly and on the go. So yeah, we worked as a team and I think collectively we produced something that was useful for people and made a difference for them in a very difficult time.
I mean, when we think back to those days, I can remember reading an article in the Belfast Telegraph, I think by Niall Eames, who had gone back as a kind of the senior orthopaedic surgeon in Northern Ireland, had gone back to be working in a Nightingale ward, and how completely exhausted he was by the whole process, and everyone around him was exhausted too. And my own family are in the health service. My son-in-law's an anaesthetist. He was exhausted as well. My daughter the same. They weren't getting any of this kind of help, I don't think, at that stage. And it was terrific that this resource was being developed for the social care workers. What difference do you think it was able to make for social care staff?
I think it made a number of differences. Firstly, the fact that NISC were proactive in developing that helped people to know that there was someone there that was thinking of them and wanting to make sure that they were taken care of. So it was really important for them to know that, because on the news we had all of the stories, as Michael talks about, of the front line in hospitals and the challenges that we're facing. Yet social care was another front line that wasn't really as prominent in people's minds. So I think for people knowing that there was people there like the social care and Mairead and Mida that were investing time in developing those resources was something in itself. Having conversations with people who have used the resource, they talked about different things that they were able to take from it. There's a wealth of different things in their models that people can use, like the well-formed outcome, to help them quickly problem solve and shift themselves from a problem state to a much more resourceful thinking about what outcome they want and helping them to quickly formulate steps that they can take to get them there. And within the resource, there's a lot of things around state management, and for people that was so very important. It's always important, but especially when you're working during a pandemic and a time of crisis. So there's really practical things in the resource, like resources around breathing and state management and, even an ABC and resilience of how to take care of yourself. So the feedback that we've got has told us that people felt it was really useful at the time and something that they could use practically and very quickly to help themselves.
I mean, Mita, it's interesting. That you were definitely ahead of the curve, I think, you guys. Resilience and well-being are now things that we talk about all the time in any kind of business situation, in any sort of work situation. But in the kind of 40-something years that I was working for the BBC, I'm not that sure that actually either of those words really ever came up around the workplace. I mean, you had thought this up, and this whole concept of getting people to think about their well-being, the well-formed outcomes and so on. What was the feedback that you got from the people that you had developed this for? What were they saying to you whenever they started using it?
I think there was a surprise that we had developed something like that anyway, but because I think we had talked about health and well-being of social care workers for a long time. But then you taking something like NLP and converting it into the resource that we converted it into, I think was quite a surprise for a lot of people. And I know that I was talking to some social care workers that I had contact with on a daily basis. They were pleased that it had been developed. They were pleased that someone had thought about them and about the work that they were doing and the importance of the work that they were doing, which I think up to that time maybe hadn't been recognised by wider society and maybe even by colleagues in the wider National Health family as well.
And we've heard that in other podcasts, just a social care worker,
yes.
But this is a profession.
It is a profession, and we're very much, as an aside to that, we're very much working on a project at the moment about getting that message out there that it is a profession, looking at the training they get, looking at the education someone gets and making it other professions within the health service recognise the work that social care workers do, because it is so important. But thinking about people that I spoke to about the time, they were able, especially their well-formed outcome, some of the things that they were facing was really quite difficult. And one of the big issues that was said to me at the time was going into someone's house with all the PPE on and the face mask on and the shield on as well, and the effect that was having on the people that they were supporting. A lot of the time they were older people who maybe were frightened about what was happening, didn't understand really what was happening. So people, social care workers started to think about how can I make this easier for the people that I'm going in to support as well, but also thinking about how they could use it for themselves, because they were facing 12-hour shifts. Maybe they were having to do extra shifts if colleagues were off sick who maybe had got COVID, wouldn't be able to work for a while. So there's an awful lot of pressure on them. So people did use it. I think they were slow to start using it, but as Maria will say, with some of the figures that we've had just around the number of people who are using it, it was a slow build-up, but it was very welcome, I think, at that stage.
Well, just as you say, that recognition that it was needed is enormously kind of self-affirming, isn't it? If you're someone who's on the receiving end of that, the fact that somebody's prepared to say what you're doing is really important and we're here to support you in whatever way we can. What about the numbers of people who were using it and the kind of feedback that you were maybe getting?
Well, as Rita said, it did start to build up slowly, but it did build up very positively quite quickly. We're sitting with over 6,500 users currently, and that is growing month on month. And as Mita said, the reason, we'd known a lot before COVID how valuable this workforce was. We'd done a lot of work in trying to raise the value of them. So when the COVID pandemic hit, we really wanted to do something that would say that we're thinking of them. We know you're important. We know how hard you work. We want to give you something back. And that whole concept of self-care. And we've built it into a lot of other resources since we've built that one. And it really got us thinking about how can we support and how can we give something back to that workforce who are quite undervalued, really. And there's not a lot of recognition of what they really do. So, and some of the comments coming back here, and I'm just looking at some here, give me a moment to breathe and refocus. These are actual comments directly from users, brings clarity and perspective. And then learn about self-care can be a buzzword, but this allows for reflection, improved knowledge and practicalities of self-care, really like the information on your own map. So it was giving them something tangible, something real to work with that they could do in a very critical time. And I don't think even we realised how critical it was. I think it's more as hindsight. We kind of just got on with doing something. We didn't really take a breath. We just went, and actually in some ways actually developing these resources, we developed 4 resources at a very fast pace with this resource at the time. And it kept us feeling that we were giving something back, that we were helping them in some way. So it was good for us as well as trying to do something to really support that workforce that we really know from working in the council. I've been there over 20 years. We know how hard they work, we know what they do, and we really want to give them something that they can tangible and that the idea of resilience and well-being. I suppose we were a wee bit ahead of the time when we think about that, but At the time we didn't. We just wanted to do something positive and give them something back in this critical time. So the figures, it's growing. It's been very positively received. We've went on and won an award for the work we've done. So we're really pleased with what we've done and the valuable contribution it has made to our workforce.
For those, Michael, who haven't tapped into this resource yet, give us a couple of maybe examples of, in layman's terms, I was conscious that the well-formed outcomes, I mean, that's the directions from the person in County Armagh, isn't it? You know,
absolutely.
Starting from here. You need to know where you're going, don't you?
You do. Just to pick up on what both Meta and Marie had said, we were very, very conscious when we were doing this about not giving the impression that there's a magic wand out there, because there really isn't. And we wanted it to be something practical. I suppose one of the inspirations certainly behind the stuff that we do is Viktor Frankl, the Austrian urologist and psychologist and psychiatrist, who I suppose his most famous work is Man's Search for Meaning. He was a Holocaust survivor. And Frankl spent his life looking at the camps and what happened after. And I suppose Frankl's work is best summed up in a quote that's sometimes attributed to him: between stimulus and response, between something happening and your response to it, is a space. And in that space lies your power to choose your own response, how you choose to respond to it. And in your response lies your growth and freedom. Frankl called it the last of human freedoms, but what he meant was that no matter what happens in the outside world, there's lots of stuff we can't control. There's lots of stuff we're not in charge of. There's lots of stuff, no matter how much we would like it to be different, isn't. What we can control is how we respond. And what I love about NLP in particular is that a lot of the techniques are about that, and certainly the well-formed outcome is one. So if I give you sort of a little run through on that, and it's a very useful kind of technique. It starts with whatever problem, whatever challenge you're facing, asking yourself, how is this a problem for me? You can turn on your TV and you can do a bit of doom scrolling and you can see the world's going to hell in a handcart at any time, and it can all look awful. It can be terrible. And certainly with the onset of COVID and what we were all going through, there was so much that was outside our control. But that very first question, whatever the issue you're facing, whether it's a global pandemic, or I can't put petrol in the car this morning, or I can't make a proper cup of coffee, or I've spilled it around me, no matter how big or small it is, starting with that question, how is this a problem for me, gives you a little bit of clarity. When it's in our heads, it's a monster. We have access to special effects Steven Spielberg would give both kidneys for. When you start to ask yourself that question, and it helps to write it down, there's decades of research now that shows that writing things down really can make a difference, can give you some clarity. How is this a problem for me? It makes it easier then to ask the next question. What would I rather have? If that's how it's a problem for me, what do I want to have instead? What's my outcome? What would I prefer to have? Because that gives you a direction to go in. Once you've asked yourself that question, what would I rather have? Then it's important to ask yourself, if I could have that, would I take it? And what you're looking for there are the yes buts. Well, maybe. Or do you need to refine your outcome a little bit? Because sometimes we do. I suppose it helps if I give a kind of practical example of this. Like most people, during the course of the pandemic, I'm saying most people, this is basically about me, I managed to put on the perfect COVID stone. A bit less exercise, eating far too much, all of the rest of it. I did manage to put on a COVID stone. And it was only when I sat down and started to work out, with actually the help of somebody else, how is this a problem for me? And the answer was, by eating junk and not taking as much exercise as I would like to, it actually made me I had less energy. I was a bit more sluggish. I maybe a bit more stressed. And I was a bit worried about, not going out and playing with my kids. So once I knew how it was a problem for me, it gave me some motivation to change that. And then the next question is, what would I rather have? and I'd rather be fitter and healthier. Sounds great, absolutely brilliant. And then when I asked the question, if I could have that, would I take it? There was a huge yes but, because while some people love going to the gym, for me it's like some kind of medieval set of torture instruments. I was no more interested in going to the gym. And that's where the refinement came in. I'd rather be able to be a bit fitter, a bit healthier by spending some time with my kids, going out for a walk, by eating more fruit. Could refine the outcome. The next 3 questions then are really useful too, because they start to make the outcome real. And the first question is, where and when do you want it by? So by asking that question, you start to give it a date. You start to give it a deadline. And there's a trick with the human brain. Always get an exact deadline. Tomorrow isn't a deadline. That's the banana file that may or may not happen. Next week, by Christmas, sometime this year, there'll be lots of other things that will happen in your life, and the chances are whatever you've just thought you would like to achieve won't happen. So always get a deadline. Always get at least a date. And normally I'll ask at that point, morning or afternoon, where will you be? Once you've got a deadline, what you're looking for is a little bit of panic in your brain. You're looking for a little bit of, I'm going to have to do it by then, because then it starts to become real. It helps if you can start to imagine where you'll be when you've achieved that. So if it's the 27th of March, for example, where will it be? Well, I'll be at home. I'll be in the kitchen. I'll be eating an apple, something like that. Once you've got that, then it helps to start to ask yourself, how will you know you've actually achieved it? What does that outcome actually mean for you? And as human beings, the only way you'll know whether you've actually achieved something, whether you've changed something in the real world, is what you see, what you hear, what you feel. So what you see, hear, feel, that's different. How will you know that what you've achieved has actually happened? And then the final question, and it's really, really important, is how much of it's within your control? Because as human beings, most of the things that we do, there's other people involved. It's not just us. And it's really important to work out how much of this is within my control and what steps can I take. How much is outside my control? And is there anything I can do about that? It's the old Bandura locus of control. It's really easy to stress about things that are outside your control, but there's nothing you can do about them. It's much more useful to focus on what can I actually do differently. We mentioned about health and social care, and there's a famous blog a couple of years ago by Chris Lake from the NHS Leadership Academy. And in the blog, Chris famously said, I hate resilience. Because the word these days is often used as a bit of an abdication. When something terrible or something difficult is going, we'll just send you in some resilience training, how's that? And the way Chris described it, he'd signed off on millions and millions on resilience training. And he said, look, the problem we have is what we're talking about in terms of resilience is the equivalent of beating people with a big stick. And then we're stopping to offer them some padded clothes so we continue to beat them with a stick. The problem was never their clothes. The problem was always the stick. For him, and the way he describes it is, resilience is a life skill we all need to learn. Life will knock you down. Things will happen. And you have to learn how to get back up off your knees. But it should only ever be short term. Because if you keep going to the well, it'll run dry. For him, he was far more interested in what Bandura called self-efficacy. Being able to, in whatever situation you're in, stop and pause and think about, right, what can I do about this, as opposed to, I just need to tough it out. And that's where the well-formed outcome is so useful. I'm in academia again, but in 2016, there's a study by Jaap Hollander and Oliver Malinowski of the University of Nijmegen. And they were able to show that by simply asking yourself those 6 questions, in whatever the issue or challenge you're facing, you could reduce levels of stress and anxiety and give yourself more of a sense of control. There's something you can do. So we'd encourage people to try this out. Whatever problem, whatever challenge you're facing, get a bit of paper. Write down what the problem is. Trapping it in words really begins to help. It gives yourself a sense of distance. And ask yourself, how is this a problem for me? Not for anybody else, but for me. What would I rather have? If I could have that, would I take it? Where and when do I want it by? How would I know I actually had it? How much of it is within my control that I can do something about, and what steps can I take? And what's outside my control? And is there anything I can do about that? If there is, great. If there's not, fine, just leave it. And just notice what difference that makes, just asking yourself those questions. That's all then actually the resource, and you can take yourself through those questions in the resource if it's helpful. But that's one example of something that it's very, very practical. It's just 6 simple questions, but can make a huge difference, whatever the challenge is that you're facing.
Leanne, if you'd still been in the social care field, how do you think applying those questions and the other aspects of NLP, of which you're a master practitioner, how would that have helped you, do you think?
Well, I'm still in the field. I may not be a social care worker anymore, but my work is to support the social care workforce and do training. So I've seen firsthand the difference that it makes for people. And as Michael says, there's so much within NLP that's so useful for social care workers. The well-formed outcome, state management, all of those things. But as well as that, for me personally, the underlying principles of NLP, when you understand those, whenever you can apply those and make sense of those, they make a significant difference. And for me, they make a real significant difference for social care workers. If you think about the role of a social care worker for a moment, people, a social care worker, there's so many demands on their time of any one day. And whenever they start out, they get a wealth of training, which is invaluable to the role, from, manual handling, first aid, basic food hygiene, safeguarding training, all of those things that help them to do their jobs. One thing that for me as a social care worker that I felt was kind of missing at the time is that you get all of that training and it's great. And when you come into social care, you're there. You need to be the best version of yourself of a day. You need to be out there supporting the individuals you work with and making sure that you do everything in your power to make sure that they have a good quality of life and that they get a high quality of care and support. And in order to do that, I think it's important that, first of all, it's important to take care of you while you're taking care of other people. And as Michael says, NLP, it is that self-efficacy in action. It helps people to do that. And that's the beauty of NLP for me. And what I love about NLP is its adaptability and how you can use it in so many different social contexts. So there's lots of models within it that you can use, but also the beliefs that underpin. I think they're really important. And if social care workers understood those, and they're all in the resource within the belief section, it would make a significant difference for them. Whenever I was doing my advanced practitioner, my master practitioner, it was learning about those principles that underpin everything. And it wasn't just thinking about them as concepts or ideas or thoughts, like that's an interesting thought or that's food for thought. It was about being able to bring them down from concepts and ground them in reality and to really embody them and to be able to live by them. So one of those, we call them presuppositions in NLP, because they're beliefs that you can choose to live your life by. We presuppose they are true because they're an effective way to help us to navigate our way through life. And one of those is the map is not the territory. Now, NLP adopted that from Alfred Korzybski and his work in general semantics. And what that means is that the things that we experience in life, our thoughts, our ideas about situations, are not the thing itself. So our thoughts and our ideas are not the thing. And for me, whenever I really got to grips with that, that was life-changing. It was transformative because when you think about that, when you experience something in life, we take information in. We take the information in through our 5 senses: what we see, what we hear, what we feel, what we touch, what we taste and smell. And our minds code that information internally. We make sense of it through creating images and sounds and our thoughts and our feelings, or what we commonly refer to as, our thinking. And then we use language in order to communicate that to people. So when we take information in, we experience our perception of the world rather than the world itself, because Psychologists estimate that there's approximately about 2 million pieces of information coming at us at any one given time. So our brains can't possibly take it all in. So we run it through a number of filters in our minds, and what we do is we generalise and we distort and we delete information, and that's a really smart way of the brain working. We generalise information, so when we see something, we look for past experiences in order to make sense of that and relate it to something we've had before. We delete information because we can't possibly take all of that in. So George Miller, the psychologist back in the 1950s, in his work in short-term memory, identified that the human mind can only focus on 7 plus or minus 2 bits of information at any one given time. Now, if you think about those 2 million bits of information that's coming at us, and we can focus on that shows that there's an awful lot of what's happening out there we don't actually see. So that's why the map is not the territory. Just like a map of, say you're going to visit, a new city or going to the London Underground, a map is a really useful way of navigating your way about there. But it doesn't give you the whole picture. It doesn't give you the whole territory. It couldn't possibly, because if it did, it would no longer be useful. You couldn't put it in your pocket and carry it with you for a start. So just like whenever we experience the world, we make sense of it. And our thoughts about those experiences, they're not the experience itself, if that makes sense. And I think whenever you really embed that and understand that, it can be very transformative. I know it was for me. And why that matters for social care workers is that if you think about it, the ultimate aim of a social care worker is to provide high quality care and support for the people that they work with and make sure that they have a good quality of life. In order to do that, you need to work with a vast array of people, all of the people in that individual's life, from them to their families and their carers, that individual circle of support. Then a social care worker is working with their colleagues, their peers, their manager. They're working with a multidisciplinary team, other professionals in someone's life. They're involving them in their local community. So they're working with all of those people that they're connected with there as well. So it's so very important then for social care workers to develop and maintain good positive relationships with people and to be able to communicate effectively. And that's clearly identified in the NIST codes of conduct and practice that are there to guide and inform social care workers of their role. One of those standards talks about that social care workers must strive to establish and maintain the trust and confidence of service users and carers. And indeed, there's another one about it. Social care workers must be able to effectively communicate. And when you understand how we all make sense of the world differently, and we all may experience something similar, but we'll have our own unique take on it. If you think about it, we're all sitting in this room now and we're all, most people would say we're having the same experience. Yet if we walk out of here today and someone comes up to you, Wendy, and asks you, how did that go? You'll tell them a very different story than what I will, because our focus of attention's in different places and we focus our attention where we're generally interested in. So it's those kind of principles, when social workers can understand that, it enhances their relationships with other people, because instead of whenever we have a conversation, we think about things, it's not that there's the right way or the wrong way, there's simply different perspectives and different ways of looking at that. And when people understand that, it can really enhance their relationships and their ability to communicate with other people. So there's so much that's there for social care workers.
It's a totally fascinating resource and a terrific story of how it's all come together as well. I think what we need to do is to tell people who are listening who haven't dipped a toe in the water yet. Don't know if one's allowed to use that kind of terminology or if it should be something a little more complicated. But if they want to get involved and they haven't yet, how do they find out more? Mita and Mairead, I think, are the people to ask about this. Mairead is going to pick this up.
Well, it's available from our Social Care Council Learning Zone, and that's available learningzone.niscc.info. and it's freely available. It's an open source website, so there's no logins, there's no barriers to get in. If you can search for it on the site or go directly to the Learning Resources section, and you'll find it there very quickly. And it's just straight in and get using it, and you can work from any device, and it'll adapt to whatever device, so from your mobile right through to your laptop or desktop, and just start to use it. So it's there, it's available for use at any time, anywhere, any device, as we say on the learning zone. So yeah, it's very easily accessible.
So there's no excuse, me, to get on with it.
Get on with it. Absolutely no excuse.
Taking care of other people, they take care of us. Let's take care of them. And it sounds as if the two of you and the whole team have done precisely that. I'm not going to let you go without congratulations on not just one, but 2 awards that you've won for this whole resource thing. One of them being the 2022 NLP Extraordinary Contribution During the Pandemic, and I must say I think that that's very much what you've all made too. My huge thanks to my top award-winning team today: Michael Dunlop, CEO of Power Choice; Leanne McCafferty of Inspiral Coaching, who's also a magician, and we never got around to talking about that, which is a real pity, but we'll do that another time with a bit of luck. You said there was no magic wand, Michael, but maybe there is somewhere in the system. Also, big thanks to Mita Keenan and Mairead Harkin, both of whom are Workforce Development Officers with the Northern Ireland Social Care Council. Thanks all of you for being with me for this podcast today.
Okay, thank
you.
you
Very much, Wendy.
This has been Care to Chat, a podcast from the Northern Ireland Social Care Council. Thank you so much for listening. And if you'd like to learn more about careers in social care and social work, visit niscc.info, where you can find inspirational stories, great learning resources, podcasts, and much more.